And suddenly we were having teachings on headship and the roles of men and women and all sorts of things we hadn't counted on at all. And some of the women who are still in my women's group, as a matter of fact, would wear sunglasses all the time because they were always crying. Okay? And would have to hold on to their chairs every time somebody started teaching because what are we going to hear this time? But it all worked out just fine.
Hi, this is Ted. Today I'm going to be talking about our new Supreme Court Justice Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Did you know that she was a charismatic? It looks like charismatics are taking over the White House and Washington itself. Well, let me explain a little bit. She's not just charismatic. She's a Catholic charismatic. Not just a Catholic charismatic. She comes from a movement within the Catholic Church that is considered by a few to be a cult. Well, let me explain a little bit before we get into this. And I'm going to look at this from two different sides, from those people from within and also from without. 1967, in Pennsylvania, the charismatic movement reached into the Pentecostal movement / charismatic movement, reached into the Catholic Church and was able to begin a huge revival of charismatics within the Catholic Church. Nowadays, they claim to have 120 million people scattered throughout the world, but Amy's group has only about 1,700 because she's a group within the Catholic Charismatic group. And that group is called the People of Praise. They began in 1971. It's a covenant community movement. Their founding fathers built on, first of all, were influenced by Cursillo. And if you don't know anything about Cursillo, it is a weekend seminar that was, I think, started in the 1940s in the Catholic Church. It's spread throughout other churches and in Protestants as well. And Cursillo is a weekend event where you get very little sleep. You get some, but you get very little sleep. And they pound a lot of your information on you there for a few days. And at the end, they end up with communion and a big celebration. A lot of people love it. Catholic Charismatic movement also part mixture with this Cursillo and the counterculture. Back in 1971, hippies were starting all these different communes. I was actually in one. I just fellowshipped there a few times on Wednesday nights. Fellowshipped the same time in Petaluma, California. I was going to a church, Christian Missionary Alliance. And the lady in Christian Missionary Alliance had property, and the Jesus people had a right-of-way in order for them to get their cars to their house, and went right through her property. And so she'd bring out her shotgun and start shooting, not at them, but up in the air, trying to scare them off, letting them know, this is my property. Now, being that I went to both places, I heard both sides of the story. The people they didn't really take her seriously, the Jesus people group, but they did kind of laugh about it. And she, on the other hand, I heard her side. She was feeling convicted by God, and she knew that she was supposed to stop it, so she did stop it. It was kind of an interesting time. Anyway, so the counterculture gets added into this whole situation, and it becomes a movement. I think they became no greater than 2,500 strong, but it kind of dies down. A lot of young people leave it. Trinity schools is something they started. Now, Trinity schools, they're in like 22 different cities, by the way. So 1,700 scattered throughout a lot of places. And Trinity schools, and I think they have 3 of them, turns out that these schools are amazing. Trying to figure out how can a charismatic church have a good school. But it did blow a lot of my stereotypes. I like my stereotypes being blown anyway. Students are learning so well, and they have such good programs. So if you are in West Bend, Indiana, especially, you gotta want to put your children in this, and a lot of people do that don't even belong to this group. They send their kids to that school because it's amazing. And Notre Dame's going to pick up a lot of those kids. All right, the newspapers, a lot of them haven't known what to think of this group. Some have delved into the territory of cult or cultish and are suggesting this. I haven't heard anybody say it is a cult, but several people seem to think it's cultish, mostly ex-members. Now, ex-members, generally speaking, are not too happy with what they've experienced or been through. So please consider that. These are ex-members. And so all this comes from ex-member discussion. And the first thing is they're very male-centric. In other words, the men kind of dominate. Women should be submissive to and listen to the men to a certain extent. I'm not sure how much. I don't have a lot of inside information on this. I just have done a lot of research in the areas of the media recently in the last week or two. And not only the media, but also just knowing about these high demand or medium demand fellowships. And this is the next point. These have demands. I consider it, from what I can tell, a medium demand fellowship for those who are involved and those who have taken the second step. After a year, they're given this decision to join the group, and if they do join the group, there are going to be demands placed on them. Now, all these demands are not necessarily stated. As in any kind of discipleship group, there are a lot of unstated demands. And I suspect that a lot of unstated demands are involved in this particular group. It is conservative, at least according to one ex-member. And there's sex abuse going on, not rampantly, not a lot of people. She just knew of one person, and that group would push that person on, finding out that it was sex abuse, move them on to the next chapter or to another chapter. Now, this is something a lot of different groups do. They don't want dirty laundry to be published. They don't want people to know there's problems in their group, and especially back in the 70s and 80s. They didn't really deal with this properly for many, many years, and even today, many groups don't deal with it properly. But in this particular case, one guy was abusing some girls, or a girl, don't know, but they just pushed him on to the next chapter, and so that was the accusation made. Now, in the early 1970s, the discipleship movement was beginning in the Charismatic Church from the Fort Lauderdale Five. In other words, these were 5 teachers down in Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and they were teaching that you should be submitting to a shepherd. And this is something that took off and very popular among charismatics throughout the United States and actually in the world. That movement never really lost its entire steam, even though several of those 5 leaders repented or admitted that they had made a mistake. But the shepherding movement, there are similarities to what this group is going through. I'm not sure they were influenced by the shepherding movement or not. Kip McKean is another one who started something several years later with the Church of Christ International, breaking away from the Church of Christ and starting his own movement with, now you have to get rebaptized into discipleship in order to be saved. There are similarities in all these, because once you get an authoritarian group, a discipleship group with authorities, those authorities are going to abuse their authority. It's just going to happen. It's one thing on paper, it's one thing idealistically to say, yes, it'd be awesome to have this discipleship group. It's another thing in practice. Practice, unfortunately, people are sinners. And because we have sinful behaviors, people who are going to mishandle authority are going to get in there. It happens, and it's going to happen. So it is authoritarian. They have, first of all, underway, for the first year you were attending their Bible studies, which are Sunday afternoons. They go to church in the morning, wherever they go to church, usually a Catholic church, most of them. And then in the afternoon, they gather together, and they are, for the first year, underway. For the second year, they are then able to make a decision. Am I going to make a covenant with this group? And that covenant includes sharing spiritually, financially, and materialistically. And it includes participation, and it includes submission. Part of that submission is, if you don't follow your leaders, if you don't follow your authority, you are disobeying the Bible. For those who see just the surface of a group like this, of any kind of discipleship group, these discipleship groups look very friendly, they look very comforting, they look like security, almost a security blanket that is going to be put over you, because you have other people helping you in your faith. You have other people teaching you. You have other people helping you to walk the right way. But to those who are in it and to those who are leaving, they say it's been controlling and suffocating. The blanket turns out to be suffocating rather than giving you warm and keeping you protected. They claim that there's fear and guilt involved. I don't know if this is something that is stated and it's from statements they make, or if this is something that's implied that you just pick up on. There's unwritten and unspoken things, and one of the unspoken things is if you leave, and I'm not sure this is spoken or not, but if you leave the group, there's nowhere to go. For two reasons. Damnation, because there is no salvation outside of the group. One ex-member mentioned that. But also because your social grouping now becomes the people in the church. So much so that business and social life is pretty much with them. And it's tough to break out of that because you don't know people outside. So you lose your friends, you lose a lot of your social life if you leave. So it's tough to leave these types of groups. And once again, most of this comes from an ex-member or two. This one comes from a journalist who was there many years ago and said it's a very friendly group. I don't put much stock in friendliness of any kind of group, because even your worst nightmare type of group can be extremely friendly on the surface. In 2017, Amy she got on the short list of judges for the Supreme Court nomination. And when that happened, the church removed her name and her family, the pictures, everything on their websites in order to keep her unassociated with them. And they did it further in 2019 when she once again was put on the short list. This was a move in part possibly because she had requested it, but also they're saying, and the official word is, they just don't want to put her family through such public scrutiny. I understand that. Actually, it was a brilliant move on their part, because what they're trying to do is protect their image as well as her image, because this can easily be seen cultish or occult, because it is a community. They live in separate houses. They live in their own houses, but they kind of share dinners, and they'll be over at each other's houses a lot. And when your child goes to school in West Bend and you live in some other city, let's say Minneapolis, you will send your kid to one of those people, one of those families from your same church, who will then go to school in West Bend. So on the surface, this could look a little cultish. And I think they're protecting their image as well as her image. All right, this group believes a lot in submission. You submit to and you covenant yourself to submitting to the group. And as far as I understand, women likewise will submit themselves to their husbands. Amy is on the Supreme Court. I fear a possibility there. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a strong possibility. It could happen that her group will influence some of her decisions. They will come in and say, you have covenanted with us to follow what God is telling us. And God is telling us right now, you should vote this way. It could be the group, could be the leaders in her group, it could be her husband. That, to me, is and could be a problem. However, on the other hand, the same issue was brought up before John F. Kennedy became president, because he was the first president to be Catholic. And people, the Protestants, were concerned because the Vatican controlled Catholicism. They were afraid that the Vatican would get involved in our politics. Okay, John F. Kennedy, you belong to us, you're a Catholic, so therefore you must vote this way, you must do this or that. And so people were afraid of that. Turns out it was not a problem, but it still remains to be seen what's going to happen with Amy and how much her group and her husband are going to influence her decisions. This is Ted.